You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Could our relationship struggles, financial challenges, and parenting patterns all come down to the same thing? Stay tuned for today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Grief can begin with death, or with a change that alters our sense of safety, belonging, and the future we imagined. As those experiences become part of our lived story, they influence our emotional resilience, our coping strategies, and how we care for ourselves and the old patterns that return in adult life. Victoria Volk, the owner of The Unleashed Heart, is an advanced certified grief recovery specialist, self-published author, certified UMAP coach, certified biofield tuning practitioner, and end-of-life doula. Through evidence-based grief programs, life path coaching, and her podcast, Grieving Voices, Victoria offers holistic support to those who want to go from surviving to thriving. Let's meet Victoria Volk. Hi, Victoria. It's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because we will be exploring grief today. And I know grief can be a really heavy topic. I also feel that there's a lot of growth in grief and actually a lot of things that we can explore and very many interesting spaces for our own healing journeys as well. So I'm really glad you're here today to talk about this with me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Petra. I love talking about grief, so thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you like to start us off maybe with a little bit about yourself and maybe the pieces of your journey or your story that you feel connect to what you do today, and also share with our listeners what it actually is that you do today?
So what brought me to this work is the loss of my own father when I was 8. But the year before that, my grandmother passed away, my mother's mother. So within a year and some change, and my dad was sick for like 16 months. So he was stage 4 colon cancer when his cancer was found. So he was sick for much of that time. But her mother was also sick with melanoma. They both had cancer at the same time. So once both had passed, I mean, as you can imagine, if I were to lose my mother and then my husband of 17 years, and you have 4 kids, 3 of which were still at home, a part of her died with him. But, my growing mind, I didn't have the capacity to put myself in her physical shoes. I was more, you're self-absorbed as a kid. But I was very empathetic. Like I did require a lot of sleep as a child. And actually, there's so many pictures of me sleeping where I would miss events because I'd go to hide to cry and I'd fall asleep. My childhood was very chaotic. I was shuffled around a lot for care. My dad was sick and then my mom remarried and he was a long haul truck driver and she would be gone with him a couple weeks out of the year at a time. And it was just my brother and I, because my sister had moved away shortly after. She was a senior in high school and her dad passed away. She was 9 years older than me. My brother was 5 years older than me. So I was kind of like an only child in a sense too. And then to top it off, I was also molested in the years that followed my father's death. So I had a lot going on in my life, but I always seemed to be the shoulder that other people cried on, including my mother and my friends. And I was the one that just, if I could keep my environment emotionally stable, then I was okay. And that translated into my adulthood of trying to carry the weight of my own stuff and also the world and everybody else's. And I started to abuse alcohol. And alcohol became my, what we call in grief recovery, my STIRB, my short-term energy relieving behavior. And once I started to drink alcohol, that led me down a path that, as you can imagine, was not good. I had several fender benders, speeding tickets. I should have been fired from my job a couple times, but I don't know why. They just kept me on. I was late time after time. And I think they maybe felt sorry for me. I don't know, but it was a prayer. There's so much happened in the meantime, right? That's for another podcast. Like I could just write a book. I did write a book, but I didn't go into all these details in the book. But because I was in a 5-year relationship that was very toxic too, that started in my junior year in high school and continued into my adulthood, and went to hypnotherapy, tried therapy. That gave me the courage to end that relationship, but it didn't help me address my grief. And honestly, I didn't even think grief was my problem. I didn't realize grief was my problem until I was in the editing phase of my book when my uncle, my father's brother, was diagnosed with brain cancer. And the other part of my father's death that I didn't share yet was that when my father passed away, we lost all connection with his family. I lost my grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. They were not in my life anymore. So for 30 years, I had not seen or spoken to my uncle. And I'd lost other aunts and uncles in the years that followed because all of his siblings died young. My father was 44. I don't think any of his siblings lived much beyond 60, if they even made it to 60. A lot of colon cancer in my family. And I did find, because I was having physical issues myself, there is no genetic link as far as that I've found now to colon cancer. So it's like, I think back and it's like this generational patterning continuing and lack of tools and knowledge and information and how people process and deal with grief. It just was not talked about. And we're not taught this stuff. And I feel like I'm jumping all over the place, but all of those experiences led to the work that I'm doing. And I went to go see my uncle. That was the whole point of me bringing up that story. We had 6 months to reconnect, and it was a beautiful experience. And, I didn't know if he'd want to see me, but I just felt this. It was like this, as if a cord was between the two of us, and it was just pulling me in. It was a very healing experience, I think, for both of us. He did pass away 6 months later, but just reflecting on all of that, it's like I realized. And then I had a friendship that fell away too around that same time. And I just realized this is grief. It was in my face. I couldn't deny it anymore. So I went to Google and I found the grief recovery method, and the rest is history, so they say. It changed my life. I felt like it was the answer to a prayer that I didn't know I needed. I initially went into it still a little naive, thinking this is going to help other people, not really understanding the capacity or depth that it would help me. And I thought it would help me, but I could not have predicted how it would have changed my life. It transformed how I parent my kids. We have family meetings with our kids. I have two, my son's 21, my daughter's 19, and I have a 17-year-old. She's going to be going to college. She's already taken college classes, but she's going to be a senior in high school. And I just think back to when, before I knew what I know now, I was such an angry mom. I was so angry. I didn't know what to do with that anger. And I started using alcohol again when my kids were young. That's the thing we don't really recognize, is that look at your patterns. They repeat. That's why they're called patterns, right? We always resort to what we know when we're feeling a certain way, when we have big feelings. And for someone like me who does oscillate between high highs and low lows, and I'm not bipolar, but I thought I was for so many years, it's just how I am. I'm a deeply feeling person that experiences life experiences in full color, like full depth, right? And I need time after I go through something to process it and feel it through. And notice I didn't say think it through, but that's what we do with grief. We intellectualize it and we try to heal a broken heart with our brains. And that's not how we fix, not fix, repair, repair the pain, repair, because it's not about fixing. And I think that's why we try to intellectualize it, is we try to fix it. And that's what I had been doing for so many years until I discovered I need to feel this. And that's what grief recovery gave me, was a safe space, first of all, and a heart with ears that would not criticize, analyze, or judge me, to truly feel and process. For most people, the heart with ears is not our friends or family, because those people have skin in our game. They will be impacted and affected by any change that we implement in our lives. And people are afraid of other people changing. We just don't handle change very well. That's grief, actually. Change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And grief also is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, and anything that we wish would be or could have been different, better, or more. So it's a lot more than just death. And that's what I talk a lot about, because so many people think, well, I haven't lost anyone that's close to me. That relationship didn't really affect me, so I'm good. I'm okay. Meanwhile, they've have a backpack full of rocks that they've put in their backpack since they were kids, of different experiences, losing a best friend maybe that moved away, or a pet that was their best friend, or parents divorced, or something happening to them physically, loss of safety and security. Addiction doesn't happen because we just have a sip and we just get addicted, right? We resort to the things that make us feel better, and then the addiction comes. But what leads to that? Grief and trauma. And trauma is what happens, and grief is what's left. And you don't have to have these big T traumas to have an experience in your life that deeply affects you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm starting to kind of see, as you're sharing, the breadth and the depth of where grief actually lives in our lives. And you're right. For so many of us, we think we have to physically lose something. Somebody has to pass away, or an animal companion. Something has to pass away for us to be eligible, I want to say, to experience grief. But there are so many things in life that confront us with those same or similar experiences and feelings. And then, of course, what a lot of us want to do is turn it off, stop it, make it go away, because a lot of the times we don't feel good when that happens. So this natural progression that you are describing of wanting to find something to help or to numb or to forget or move on, in case of addictions or anything else that we find that might not be the most positive way that we can work through this. But there's so many instances, big life experiences, divorces, moves, anything that really, I want to say, even rattles our identity and shakes some foundations on that. Of course, our physical safety being threatened. And then, yes, the loss of loved ones or friends as well. So I'm just really starting to understand this bigger picture of what you were describing, of all the little pieces that actually are grief in our lives that we might not even think are part of this whole thing that we're accumulating, many of us, since our childhood, right? And then going forward. And I find it interesting that we kind of start to cope with it in whatever ways that we can, right? There are things that come up and we feel bad, and we try to find ways to make this better, be this through alcohol or anything else. So I feel like we innately are quite intelligent. It's just that sometimes we don't find quite the right methodologies to help us on that healing journey. What did you find that as you were coming into adulthood, you described being an angry mom and you described using alcohol to help yourself. So what are you finding, and maybe with yourself and your clients, how do these patterns show up as we come into adulthood? A lot of these grief patterns already started, when we were younger and in our childhood. How do you see these showing up as we're coming into adulthood in the way that people mentally feel, emotionally feel, physically feel, right? What are you seeing in your practice?
We always resort to what we know. And so as children, we're like sponges. Actually, by age 3, we've learned how to respond to 75% of our knowledge comes from how to respond to life by the age of 3. 75%, we've already learned all that. The remaining 15 comes, or 25, comes when by the age of 15. Let's say you have a child in the household and the parents, they're coping by using alcohol. Well, it's not just the alcohol that potentially leads that child to abuse alcohol too. It's not seeing the parents necessarily using the alcohol that leads that child to addiction. It's the experiences of living with two parents who are addicted to alcohol that leads that child to use alcohol. Do you see? There's a distinction there. It's not the witnessing, it's the feeling and the experience in the body. Maybe there's fighting. Maybe there's, are they a mean drunk? Are they emotionally, obviously, then emotionally unavailable? I mean, almost no attention is almost worse than bad attention, right? So you see children acting out to get attention. So it's not even necessarily what we witness, but it's also the environment, and the mind is very crafty at helping us protect ourselves, right? And so that's where it's not even just alcohol. It could be shopping, gambling, relationships. What scares me is I see these young people, 10, 11, 12, getting into relationships. And it's like, that didn't even cross my mind when I was 10 to get into a relationship, probably because my sense of safety and security was completely stripped away, right? And I was very not trusting of people. But it's so many things. It can be so many things. Pornography, smoking, just if you are participating in even exercise or being of service to others can be a stir, because if you are doing that, anything that you are doing, are you doing it to distract yourself? Are you doing it? Like, what's the intention behind it? And what did you feel? What did you feel? Man, not what did you think? Because thinking is first, right? But then you feel. But it's the feeling that drives the behavior. It like reinforce, and then you do the thing because you feel a certain way. And then what's left? Guilt and shame. Because all of those behaviors and things, shopping, gambling, pornography, relationships, anything that you do to feel better for a short period of time can lead to guilt and shame. So then it's a perpetual cycle. But in being of service to others, you can't think about yourself when you're being of service to others. But the dichotomy of that is you're not thinking about yourself ever then, or rarely, or how often, especially if you're doing it, unless you're addicted to being of service to others, right? You're not sitting with yourself and with your feelings. What do I have to prove? What am I trying to prove here? What am I not giving myself that I feel like I need to give to everybody else? It's so nuanced and there's so many layers to it. That's why it's so difficult for people to connect the dots. But it's so blatantly obvious to me because I do this work, right? But when you're in it and you're in the thick of it, you just do not see it. It's so hard to see it. And that's what grief recovery helped me do, is to notice my patterns, bring to my awareness my behaviors that are not serving me, that are not helpful. And truthfully, is not who I am. That's not my true self, my authentic self. When we are resorting to these behaviors to feel better, that's not authentically who we are. It's just something that we're doing. And then we become the identity of it, right? Like, so for alcohol, it's an easy example. Well, then I'm an alcoholic. It's no longer just a thing that I'm doing to feel better. Now it's an identity.
And those are, I think, quite difficult to work with, right? When we take these on as identities, because then we do come back to asking existential questions about our own foundational safety and who we are and what we are doing in this world. And that in itself can send us into a real tailspin when we start questioning and digging into that. So I can really see how this threads through all of our lives, sort of starting right from childhood all the way up into adulthood, and how we, I want to say, participate in relationships, or how we are at work, how we show up as leaders. Even I think our finances are affected by these patterns that come through in grief, right? Because if we are growing up in families where there are addictions and things like that, money is often a big part of those addictions. So I can see how this connects to pretty much everything that we experience in our lives. So what I want to ask you, Victoria, is, and probably our listeners are becoming very curious about this too. How did you actually find something to help you through this grief journey? And I'm not sure if we ever come out the other end of it, because I feel that, when we lose someone, it kind of stays with us, right? There's something that changes, and I'm not sure that ever goes away. But what have you found? What have you discovered in your journey that actually helped you maybe make sense of these feelings, or be in those feelings a little bit longer, or find different coping mechanisms for these feelings? What have you found that was actually helpful to you?
Well, for me, it's been the tools of grief recovery, because just as you said, alcohol is a relationship, money is a relationship, but we have a relationship with all of these things. Food. I have a food story. Like growing up, there wasn't much food in the house. There wasn't home cooked meals. I literally grew up kind of eating Fruity Pebbles. That's translated into a very, I'm just unwinding that now, to be truthful about that. It's like we all have a relationship with these things in our life, whether it's food, our bodies, money, grief. It's a relationship. And if we look at it that way, okay, what's my responsibility in this? So that's part of grief recovery too. Like we all play a role. What's my responsibility in this? Can I, even in a case of abuse for me, like where can I take at least 1% responsibility, just 1% in this experience? It's not to condone, it's not to blame myself, but it's how do I want this to be? How do I want to perceive this moving forward? That's my responsibility. It's really working through all of that. And it's, as an evidence-based program, we do that through every week builds on itself. And we're working through apologies. We're working through forgiveness. We're working through unresolved grief. In a nutshell, is undelivered communications. I mean, that's a nutshell of it. It's all these things that we can't say, couldn't say, can never say to another, or maybe even to ourselves, admitting to ourselves. And I think that's a big one, is what am I resistant to admitting to myself? Because when you acknowledge something, you then have a choice. And so many grievers don't feel like they have a choice. But doing nothing is a choice. And when I say do nothing, this has been a struggle for me in working with people too, because, I'm when you're further along in your grief healing, right? And to your point, it's going to be a lifelong thing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, well, you get to the finish line, you're good to go. Life's not going to life anymore. Well, we know that's not the case, right? We're going to continue to lose people in our lives. We're going to continue to have possibly relationships where there's estrangement. That's a big one for people. Estrangement from your own kids, grandparents, there's so many ways that relationships wound us, and different types of relationships that wound us. You never fully arrive, I don't feel. But when you have the tools and the knowledge to resort to something new, right? To resort to, where you're not intellectualizing it, where you're applying a tool, a framework, then you don't resort to the thing that made you feel better before. You're actually working through and processing and transmuting that energy, that angst, that anger, that whatever emotions there are, whatever undelivered communications there are. You don't need to confront anybody with this method. And the thing about forgiveness is not for the other person, it's always for yourself. I had to learn to forgive my abuser for me, not for him. It was for me. But I was never going to get an apology. Never. I'll go to my deathbed before I get an apology. So this is why it's so important when you've done something that you feel has hurt somebody, apologize. Don't ask for forgiveness because that's for them. That's not for you. If there's something that you think you need forgiveness for, you actually need to issue an apology. So we talk a lot about that in this method and all the things, and truthfully, looking at your entire life. Because when you look at everything in black and white, you realize that it's a lot more than just about death. And honestly, the patterns reveal themselves in that process. And you can often connect so many different ways that you've shown up in your life as an adult to specific or certain relationships from your childhood. And often, truthfully, it's a parent. And I have come across people that we can enshrine a parent where they just were, they cannot say anything bad about that parent. But the thing is that's not truthful. That's not honest because nobody's perfect. And when we enshrine people, that's just not the honest emotional truth. There's something that you took away as a child that is influencing your adulthood. It's not to blame, point fingers, which I did for many years towards my mother. Like she was the source of all of my anger and my resentment. And if she would just change, my life would be better and da 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 da. But I was the one that needed to shift my perspective and be able to look at her with compassion because she had her own story well before I came into her life. She had her own grief well before I came into her life. That's helped me forgive, to be more compassionate about that and being emotionally honest about how I felt. But I didn't have to tell her. I did this work with a heart with ears that wouldn't criticize, analyze, and judge. Think if I would have gone to my mom and said, gave her this laundry list and gave her everything that I shared with my heart with ears, that I don't know that she would ever spoken to me again. What good is that going to do, right? It's inner job for us. It's our responsibility because she could say, oh, I'm sorry for this and this and this and this. But if I haven't delivered what is emotionally incomplete, I'll still feel the same way. Those patterns will still repeat in the relationship. And that's why this work matters. I had a client say to me, people say you got to do the work. I get it now. This is the work. And it really is.
No, that's really beautifully said. And I feel there's so much depth to this because this is one of the first things that comes up in our own healing journeys is, well, you have to forgive and you have to let go. And those are, I feel, two things that can bring up a lot of resistance, right, when we're on that healing path. Because first is, well, if I forgive, then that means I'm saying that was all right, whatever this other person did or what happened, right? And if I let go, I'm going to forget the person who passed away, who is my loved one or whoever died. So I feel that's actually really beautifully put, is that we can do those things in a way that respects ourselves and still helps us find some measure of healing. Otherwise, I think if we remain sort of chained to the grief in certain instances, it won't allow us to reconnect with joy, and it won't allow us to rediscover the life that we have left, right? Because there's still a life to live after someone passes away. So I find it really comforting that you're sharing that those things are all possible within finding our healing journey and still being able to have those things, to forgive, to heal, to still have people in our hearts that have passed away, and yet maybe find a way where we can healthily cope with the feelings, where we can healthily live these feelings and be in those feelings and still then find a way to live. So I find that also very empowering. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Visual I like to use is way back in the day when people were grieving, they would actually, and they handled death so much differently than we do now. We've gotten so far removed from the death experience. And that's another podcast for another time. But just one of the analogies I use. It's like grief is literally like the veil that you wear. Back in the day, women wore a veil, covered their face. When you look in the mirror and you're wearing a veil, you don't see yourself clearly, right? You don't see other people clearly. You lift the veil and you see yourself more clearly and others more clearly. So the veil is the barrier between, it is all of those things that we've been talking about. It is the weight of grief. It is the attachment to the pain that keeps you wearing the veil. And it's this work of slowly but surely just rolling it back and step by step processing and working through it, that you do get to a place. And I'm so glad I did, because my children reap the benefits of that. It's absolutely changed how I parent. We have, I think, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we have like family meetings. We speak openly about how we're feeling or how the impact someone's having on us. Never did I have that experience growing up where I could freely share, even if there was potential for it to be received as criticism or negative, open and honest. And that's what I have with my kids because of this work.
Yeah, I feel the impact of this is huge. And especially because we carry this forward, of course, not just into our adulthood, but into our own families, right? So what comes after all of that as well, and the generations that follow. So there is a huge importance, right, to seeing those patterns.
Imagine if I wouldn't have done this work and I would have continued to be the angry mom. That ripples, right? That has ripples. That has an impact. I can change that. We all have the power to change that, to change our impact, to change the kind of ripples we have in our immediate relationships, in our bodies. We all have that power. I'm no one special. It's within us. But fear, anger, sometimes those big emotions just are overwhelming and we're resistant. It's resistance, fear and resistance that keeps us stuck.
Yeah, I'm resonating on that. And as I think back to some of the parts in life where I've experienced very deep grief, this is kind of exactly right what eventually happened is eventually we find those places, eventually we see the patterns, and then that helps with healing. So yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. I find this, I think, also really enlightening to take forward into our own lives, to give maybe a few minutes of thought to what kind of pieces in our lives could be pattern of grief, what could be part of that we're experiencing today as adults that may be connected to grief or trauma that we've experienced previously. So a lot of things for our listeners to take away and actually maybe spend a few minutes with themselves to tune in and see how that resonates with them and in their lives. Yeah, thank you for that. And Victoria, share with us if our listeners are curious and maybe they are going through their own grief, or they have a long-term grief that they've been experiencing for decades or since they were younger, how can they connect with you? And what kind of programs and services do you have available for people to work with you?
Yes, thank you. Well, my website, theunleashedheart.com, I have a ton of free resources, a lot of free ebooks, and a meditation on there is free as well. But yeah, I work with people one-on-one for 12 weeks. That's my really deep, this is the deep work where you work through two of your most difficult relationships. And then I'm working on launching a resource for people that wish to support grievers or someone going through challenging times that just don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. It's one place where all of that information will sit. And then also a resource for grievers specifically that will be, what do you need that day to feel better, but in a healthy way, right? It's a healthier approach. It's, there's no homework or anything. I keep it really tangible and practical for people to have these quick wins to experience, and having this acute experience, or to better understand where they are that day or that period of time. So that's coming out too. I do want to direct people to one of my episodes, my early episodes of the Grieving Voices podcast. It's titled The Myths of Grief. And there's 6 myths of grief that we didn't even get into, that pretty much all of society has learned as children. And it's at the core of informational talks that I give. But that's a resource that I would direct people to following up to this episode, that they'll learn a lot more than what I just shared. So Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those wonderful resources. I almost feel we have to do another episode now. There's so much more we can talk about. And we'll be sure to link to what Victoria mentioned in the show notes as well. And we'll link her website and where you can find those resources. And also, I think we'll put a link to the podcast episode that you mentioned so that people can find those resources easily and can maybe even expand on what we talked about today and find that more resources to help them in their own journeys. And of course, if you are experiencing your own grief journey or you are carrying around a lot of that grief that may have been there for a long time, reach out and connect with Victoria and see if there's something that can help in your life, because this sounds to me so empowering. And also, having grown from the grief that I personally experienced, I feel that there is actually a lot that comes with grief that we can heal through and empower ourselves with. So I wish that really to everyone, to find those pieces and to unfold them and to find their healing in this process. So thank you, Victoria, for being here today. And thank you for sharing your journey and all the things that you have discovered and your wisdom all around grief. I really appreciate that you're here today with me.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. And I hope you find your own healing on your grief journey. And hopefully this episode has given you some things to connect with and some places to start at. And until we hear each other again, take care of yourselves and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.